So here we are, November 3rd, um, before an election tomorrow. It's there's a critical piece which will probably go fine here in Pennsylvania. There's a quirk in our system, and the Supreme Court judges are up for nonpartisan retention or not retention every 10 years. Um, and in the whole history of the state, there's only been one judge who failed to be retained. Important thing is that the three are up are, pardon the phrase, left-leaning, and are critical to stop and anti-abortion madness and other things in the state. Um, so uh, I guess it's good that we'll end a little bit early, get a little extra sleep. Got to be there very early in the morning to set things up. Linda, you working the poll tomorrow? Yeah.
No, but we have
Oh,
stuff here too. We're going to get a really good feeling for whether or not Georgia's kind of got this balance. When I first moved here in 1980, it was 60% of the state was rural Georgia and 40% was Atlanta. And I thought at the time, 10 years from now, that's going to switch. It took more like 30 years, but it has switched now. And we're about to find out whether the Democrats in Atlanta are going to rise up. We have Public Service Commission uh, election tomorrow that's real important and has to do with the fact that we have the fourth highest electric bills in the country because of screw up of a nuclear power plant by Georgia Power, and it's always been run by right wing folks because of the way they're elected. And so the question is this the round that's going to say, no, Metro Atlanta has risen up? And given we have two Democratic senators, I'd say we've kind of earned our credibility here. We'll see how it goes, but it's real important for us locally. And then there are a lot of mayor and whatnot elections too. So it'll be interesting to see how all this goes. Still, I am not a believer in the functioning of these machines. We shouldn't be voting on computers. There's too many opportunities to screw it up. And so I'm concerned about the whole election process myself.
yeah. For tomorrow, you know, um, it's hard for me to imagine that the bad guys have gotten so well organized that they can get down to such nitty-gritty elections. But I don't have great confidence in the 2026 at this point, and that's kind of scary. Um,
Yes, yes, I agree with you.
yeah,
I'm
and yeah,
reading a lot lately about what's wrong with us. And one of the things that has come up in my reading has been this idea that we as a species are very resistant to unpleasant truths in ways that make me wonder if it isn't because of our initiating events and the fact that we were waiting for authorities to tell us things or something like.
well, thank you very much for the lead in.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're going in that direction, and I'll shut up.
So don't shut up for long. Everybody, feel free to wave a hand or just butt in, um, because you may find something that you just got to say something about. Um, so we, our emotions are complex things. and an emotion of any kind um, is a combination of a wired-in, built-in reaction pattern. The biological component of the emotion is one of several affects wired in, like disgust and anger uh, and distress. There are very specific circuitry involved in the brain in the limbic system. Um, and one of them that we have a great deal of difficulty with, and it very closely relates to what Linda just referenced, is one called shame. Now, all of them, all of the affects evolve to protect and enhance life, and it's a little complicated to see how shame does that, but we'll have to leave that for another lecture. But we have a terribly difficult time recognizing and managing this state of being, which occurs when anything good, anything enjoyable or anything interesting gets interrupted, gets impeded, and we are not allowed by circumstances to keep feeling good. Okay, and this feeling generates the biological feel of it is kind of like, ugh, just everything feels bad. Um, and we handle it very poorly. And one guess is, well, you know, there was so much shame involved at the start in being slaves, um, that it became a toxic affect for us. Now, we do know from relatively recent history how absolutely demoralizing, dehumanizing, humiliating the state of slavery is. There's almost nothing worse that you can put someone through, or a culture through. Um, so we have some escape routes that we try to get away from this unmanageable and intolerable internal state. Um, and uh, one of them involves uh, attacking the perceived cause of our discomfort. Okay, so that's an attack other reflex. A good example we have for someone who is absolutely and totally intolerant, very sensitive to, but absolutely totally intolerant um, of shame, and that's someone named Donald. Uh, and his response is totally in the attack other realm, attack other direction. You know what they are doing, what he did, all of that. Okay. And some of you may know people who live in that escape from shame. They're always looking for a fight. The opposite of that response, that attempted escape, is to attack the self. It's all my fault. That leads to depression and suicide eventually. You know, another axis um, involves uh, withdrawal from the unpleasantness, withdrawal, and that is the basic mechanism that's behind the mass amnesia for our traumatizing origins. Our early times were just things that we don't want to remember, and we've just conveniently forgot, consciously anyway. And along that line, but in an opposite direction in a sense, is avoidance and denial. Not important, doesn't happen, not going to pay any attention to it. Okay. Now, there are two ways. Linda, yeah,
So, okay, all right, maybe you're getting here,
no, go ahead.
but it seems to me like this is probably the single most important thing for us to overcome right this minute.
Right this minute.
So,
So,
I'm hoping that where you're headed is now, what can we do about this?
okay. So, Linda and I, we've exchanged notes that there are two ways in which we keep bumping into um, the escape of denial and avoidance. Um, Now, it's not absolutely universal, but with the Mesopotamian tale, okay, um, there are very few people with minds open enough to give, to listen to it. For most first encounters, the moment that you mention extraterrestrials, that's the end of it. Like you're crazy. I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to hear about it. Okay. Um, Absolutely perfect example of avoidance. Okay. It's just, it brings back too much trouble, pain, fear, anguish. It's just too big a deal. It's, totally humiliating to think that, um, uh, you know, we were slaves, okay, or that we didn't develop civilization ourselves; it was given to us. Like the story that it's a gift of the gods was literally true. We don't want to know that. Okay, there's just so much of the actual story that we don't want to know. The other way in which we keep bumping into uh, avoidance is the the for those who can sit still long enough and think about it clearly enough, the absolutely screamingly loud evidence that the 2024 election was stolen. Okay. Um, I mean, many people initially said, "Wait a minute, the day after, like, this does not pass the smell test." You know, it just it couldn't be. After such close polling and pretty accurate, apparently polling, he gets all of the swing states that and then some people looked into it, and found the statistical evidence that was glaring, you know, and they can't get the message across effectively. It's like it's too big, it upends too much. Um, it's uh,
May I add
it
something?
it uh, it amounts to, and I'll tell you why I'm going to use this word, amounts to rebellion in order to begin to say, yes, I think that's the case. Let's find out. Let's prove it. Let's count by hand the paper ballots that we still have. You know, let's do that. Um,
That's what they're for.
Pardon?
That's why we have paper ballots.
Yes,
That's why they were put there in the first place.
to be
Remember,
right, to be
remember,
counted, but now the resistance to counting them is tremendous.
they
Okay.
have never been counted, not once. The
Hmm.
one
Well,
time that a court order said they should be counted, they were accidentally destroyed before
Accidentally destroyed. Of course.
accidents happen. Yeah.
How many accidents happen when people are being very careful not to have any damn accidents?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean,
Well,
I'm
Mike, I have a sense. What do you think? Is that a lot of people, a lot of ordinary people, they don't put a lot of time into thinking about the elections, but they're kind of tired about the drama of every presidential election we have is being contested. And I mean, I think in the time period of my paying attention was was oh my goodness, I don't remember the year. It was one of the Bush elections, Bush the younger, in Florida, the recount in Florida.
Bush
And,
v. Gore,
oh,
2000.
and then it went to the Supreme Court. Yes, right. And I have some Democrat friends that guarantee, see, they just went off the rails and they think it was like totally bought or corrupted at that point. And they're following everyone since then has had some uh, shadow, and people might be getting tired of it. They're just
Well, I mean, the bad guys are very clever, and right now they're raising their completely unfounded complaints about 2020. Okay. And the purpose of that is to muddy the water, to make it, one is fatigue, as Jim is saying. We just like had
Yeah,
enough of this.
it's just like
it's too
mental
much,
fatigue.
but not only fatigue, they're muddying the waters because it makes it look like uh any effort to verify the vote is just, crazy stuff like the 2020 crazy stuff. They are knowingly pushing crazy things to make our efforts now look crazy. You know, they're
Yeah.
very smart. You know, they know how to fight a war. You know, um, so how is this all linked together? Um, uh, Donald, um, his aim, his deep aim, you know, I don't think, I mean, I don't want to credit him with too much consciousness, but his deep aim is destruction. He's a destroyer. He's the grown-up kid who pulled the fly's wings off. He's into pain and destruction. So was Enlil. Enlil is mankind's nemesis. His aim, more than once in the ancient times, was to wipe out humanity. Okay, and so he is revisiting us in the form of Donald. Okay, and look, the gold aspect is not a trivial, ridiculous feature of this so-called administration. The gold was the metal of the gods, and later the metal of the kings. Um, so unconsciously, he's showing his cards with the gold. Um, and and it really does look like it's way, way too dangerous to seek the truth about the 2024 election. I mean, who wants to be the one who lights the match to start the Civil War? No, it really isn't that dangerous. And in the end, it'll be life-saving because nothing has really slowed down this juggernaut of evil, this juggernaut of pain and greed and cruelty. Nothing is slowing it down. I mean, we may slow it down some. I'm not without hope for all the positive energies that are going on, but they haven't been effective yet. This would would more than slow it down. To demonstrate that the regime is totally illegitimate, and it was there by stealth, you know. Um, and there too, it's funny, so to speak, funny, everything cycles. Part of the big conflict on Earth at the start of the colonization by the Anunnaki was the consequence of the prior king of Nibiru, Alalu, complaining that Anu, An, the father of Enlil and Enki, usurped rulership of Nibiru. That he stole the throne, and the first battle that went on here was in the sky between the forces of Alalu and the forces of An. So over and over and over. Okay. It is an enormous reenactment at many, many levels. Um, And, how it's going to play out, we don't know. I've got very, very long range hope, but, uh, that's a whole other story, how I can stay positive in the midst of all of this. Paula's internet connection just died. Okay. Um, hmm, I can't help out there. If I,
Mike, don't you think that what I may have mentioned in an email, maybe I didn't, was to you was that my assessment of at least our presidential elections, is that they've all had cheating, except for the first two where Washington ran unopposed. And so cheating in an election is not for me, is not a big concern. It happens. I mean, it's just been happening. I assume, but with human nature, the prize is too big to not tempt some people of criminal practice. And the question then is the cheating enough to sway the election?
Can I throw in something there?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
that's the point, is that prior, if you want to cheat, there's a big penalty for cheating, first of all. And if you cheat, you're going to cheat one vote at a time prior to computers.
Right. Yes.
Now the problem is that cheating can be done, and the thing is, this is something that's all new to me, but election integrity is actually an academic specialty. There are people whose specialty in academia is how you tell from the outside if elections are fair. And there are certain hallmarks that show up. And they show up all over Eastern Europe. So we really know exactly what they look like. And what's happening is that these have been imported into US elections to the point where it sure does look like Kamala Harris won in 2024. And that's the piece that Mike and I talk about pretty regularly. And when you're used to looking at data, it's so clear. You have an emotional reaction because you know the truth of it. My thought is, if the rest of the country could have that emotional reaction, in other words, if they could be made to understand what I understand about what happened in 2024, I think it would change everything.
well, the problem is that you're talking of, not only is it a kind of a high level of thinking to understand those statistics, but it's also a matter of thinking. And thinking is not what runs votes and what runs elections. What is going to would make a difference, because Kamala has got to know she was robbed. She's got to know that by now. Okay. It would be people, not so much her, because she's not so convincing, but like Pritzker, or like the senatorial candidate now, I forget in Maine, people who will grab attention and will be out there screaming, because they're talking from their conviction based on the statistics, but it's their fight, it's their rage, it's their they are disgusted and outraged. That's what will change the vote,
Well,
not
there
the
are.
information. I don't, you're asking people to think. That's the trouble.
Well, my understanding is that a group of 20 something of these academic specialists who study elections wrote to Kamala and Waltz before the election was certified, and said, look, we need to do some actual paper ballot counts, and they let it pass. So they knew at the time that the experts were saying there's a real problem here. And I'm guessing, and I've heard Waltz interviewed about where people have really pinned him down and said, no, really, do you think the votes in 2024 were accurate? And his final answer, and I quote, was, I can't go there.
Right, right. Um,
Okay.
But for which reason?
I didn't know what they knew when they knew it, but I'm not surprised.
No, that's
Well,
fine.
if you can't, if he says I can't go there, this is like worthless.
Agreed.
Yeah, what's the why not?
So I mean, my
There's
sense
at
of it,
least three different ways to understand the words inside that quote.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
I know. It's an amazing quote, isn't it?
there
But
there
that
are
but two of them are not inculpatory.
Right.
At least, yeah.
I dare not go there.
I cannot go there. And I've heard him say that more than once. He
You know, and
doesn't want to be the one that sets off a civil war. I think that is the point.
Okay.
And perhaps a positive spin on why Kamala didn't call it is because it was so obvious that perhaps, this is just my speculation, she wanted the people to do it. And I can understand, because we could do it. If we were convinced as a population, we could do it. It wouldn't take a lot to get, if enough people were interested in pursuing this, those and a few recounts, it wouldn't take much data.
but she also, it was beyond, the thing is, she reached her threshold. She could master San Francisco politics, you know, and she could use her sharp elbows, you know, against, you know, situations that she knew. To take it to the national level, she couldn't do it. She couldn't be the angry woman. She had up until that point, she had campaigned on, you know, some version of joy. We're gonna, you know, Trump is all nasty and mean, and we're happy, you know. So she had campaigned as the happy woman, and now she was going to turn into the wicked witch from the West. It wasn't going to work for her personally, you know. And another thing that hung them up was their exaggerated principles of, you know, we believe in democracy, we believe in elections, we believe in the system. Okay, so you know, they believe in the system to their demise, you know, because the system was screwed. But they had to project a belief in the system. So
There
all of, yeah.
There is an ongoing lawsuit in the state of New York. And one of the things that's really interesting about this lawsuit is that there are precincts where the Senate candidate got thousands of votes and Kamala got 0. And the election board there, despite all of the data that suggests that there's reason to go back and count those paper ballots, because that's what all they're asking for is let's just pull out those paper ballots and count and see how they compare to the machines. That's why there are paper ballots and have been for the last 25 years. And what's happening is that the officials in the election board are just saying no, and not with any reason. They just say, no, we don't think you have enough evidence. No. I mean, what rationale can they possibly have other than money? And if somebody said, we won't do it unless you donate, I'd send a check for $1,000 today myself to do that recount.
There's a pride factor in it too for them, you know. We run an honest show. Nobody could have pulled the wool over our eyes. Don't know, you know. I mean, but some of the evidence there is so screaming. There are precincts where 110% of the registered voters voted.
Right, right. There are precincts where 160%.
So, Mike, how do you get that information in a competent format to the people that donated hundreds of millions of dollars to the Kamala's campaign? They're the ones that might be interested. They're the ones that might have financial and social connections enough to make something happen.
Well, the campaign has all the contact information though. And the campaign is the obstacle. The political class is the obstacle.
Which
Yeah,
makes
that's a
you
good.
wonder,
How do you?
and that's the piece that makes me really uncomfortable. Maybe the Democrats cheat too. I don't know.
I mean, it's Jim's right. The chicanery and the cheating has gone on from the beginning. In the first contested election, there was a dirty play in the propaganda. The Adams side was claiming that Jefferson was a godless man, and he'd be trashing Christianity, and Jefferson's people were putting out that Adams was a hermaphrodite.
Whatever sells, huh?
Whatever works. That's funny.
It's just that the prize is too big. It's too big. It tempts the worst in a person.
Well, if we go back to Plato, he really didn't think very much of democracy, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
But he was in a fix because he realized that in his, in the ideal republic, the philosopher king and the noble elite, it was just not workable. That human selfishness and greed and the wish to pass on one's privilege to one's descendants was going to be too strong.
Yeah.
His ideals that he would not work.
Yeah, I think that British guy who actually seems more and more to me the more I take a look at it, Lord Acton. Yeah, that's the title name. Yeah, he had a common name as well. I've forgotten what it is. He basically said there's no class of men that's fit to govern. I mean, this sounds like an older person who's at the end of his life and at the end of his rope, and he's given up all optimism. It's just no good.
Well, I mean that's a profound truth, and it's like, well, how do we work at scale for the system that works in indigenous communities? The indigenous community works by coming together to make a decision, and they come to consensus. Okay. How do we scale up from a Quaker meeting?
Yes, right.
That comes to the sense of the meeting. It's not even called consensus. It's not even compromise. It's we wait until it's clear what the sense of the meeting is. Okay. How do we scale that up for civilizations? It does not work in civilization. That's the issue. It only works for a little while.
Give them lots of
Jefferson had a hint about that. He said, all laws should have a sunset clause.
Yeah, right.
I mean that doesn't work either.
That doesn't totally work, but right. But let's revisit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We can come back to all this joyful material. Let's get down to some of the more different kinds of facts that have been coming to light. Not that many, the last 2 months, and I'm not sure what that means because up until now, we've had fresh meat, every month, and then less for the last half a year or so, not quite so many coming through. I'm not sure what that's about. But here's an interesting piece that throws some light on the job that Enki and his half-sister Nienmach did in the lab. New York Times, an article in the science section, I don't have the date, by Carl Zimmer, titled "The Evolutionary Steps to Standing Upright." And in order to reach true bipedalism, requires primarily a reconfiguration of the major bone of the pelvis, the ilium. And this group began comparing earlier primates and especially earlier Homo species, and they found that in the reconfiguration of the ilium, that it was not a gradual process, but it was a sudden flip from what had been, a four limbs on the ground, the knuckle walking, or something approaching knuckle walking, definitely a posture that was not fully upright, but was still leaning forward a great deal. All of a sudden changed. So that's, for us, prima facie evidence of intervention. That, all of a sudden an acceleration of morphologic difference. But more significantly, when they studied fossils in another way and comparing the human pelvis with pelvis of all kinds of species, what they found was that to go from the basically four-legged configuration to the two-legged configuration was a matter of turning off certain genes and turning on certain genes, turning off and turning on. That was the mechanics, the genetic mechanics, to change the shape of the bone, which means that that Enki and Nienmach, they were not involved with inserting new genes, but with only turning on and turning off what was there. And they knew how to do that because they had the same genes. I think, and again, I think this is well-grounded speculation. I think that the only difference between the Anunnaki and Homo erectus was that the Anunnaki had a few million more years of evolution behind them, that they started out in essentially the same place. Why I say that is that the only thing the only series of events that puts together the current astronomy, Earth in the third orbit, asteroid belt in the fifth orbit, okay, with the accounts in the Mesopotamian tale of the collision between the moon of Nibiru and the planet that was in the fifth orbit, okay. The only thing that puts that together was that collision pushed Earth into the vacant third orbit that had been vacant ever since Nibiru was thrown out, virtually thrown out of the system, but not quite, and so it came in and out like a comet, which means that the the Anunnaki evolved right here in the third orbit on a planet that was very much Earth-like, and we know that because when they got here, they just stepped out of their ships and breathed the air, drank the water, and started to grow crops, you know? So it was like coming home. Even though Nibiru had changed because they had to live for a long time in the void of space, and they had a very artificial world. But originally, so they were coming back to home. So, in other words, there's not that much difference between us and them. Uh, and they caught us up most of the way to them from where Homo erectus was. They caught us up maybe 3/4 the way, halfway, 3/4 the way, something like that. So they knew about turning on and turning off genes because they were just using their own DNA as the model for where to bring the DNA of Homo erectus. Now, that's still not an easy task, and according to the timeline in the tablets, it still took tens of thousands of years to do the job. Um, um, but it makes the accomplishment um, less astounding at the scientific level, maybe completely astounding at the spiritual level. But at the biological level, say, well, yeah, we can see how they could do that. Yeah, yeah. And as I said, they had the model in themselves.
Mike,
Thought?
the issue that I have with that is not that both planets could have at different times occupied the same place, and so the climate and the planet and everything else would be hospitable in the same way. That I totally agree with, and that the genetic engineering of turning on and off does not seem far-fetched. The thing that catches me up is that if you just go back to the primordial soup of wherever the Earth was before it was in that position, and then going from Operon and Haldane all the way to knuckle draggers, if you will, still takes so much DNA, so much evolution. And to think that we would be that similar to the genetic progression from the early days to the Anunnaki seems not necessarily that probable to me.
Well, if the chemical configuration is about the same and the gravitational field is about the same, and life, however it starts from the primordial soup, begins in both places, planet orbit 3, planet orbit 5,
Right.
Evolution starts at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Evolution on the future Earth, which is in orbit 5, goes more slowly because it has so much less energy input from the sun.
Yeah.
So that would mean at any point in time, the inhabitants of the original of the planet originally at orbit 3 and the creatures on the planet originally in orbit 5, their evolution would be out of step by some millions of years because of this is Brenner's theory, because of the much less lessened energy input to that planet from the sun.
Totally agree with that.
Okay, and then evolution speeded up, when we got thrown into the orbit much closer to the sun, but still had no way of catching up with the people on Nibiru, who had such a head start.
Yeah, we still just seem so similar, and it just seems like there's so many other possibilities. That's all.
And I throw in one point here, and that is that the assumption you're making is that evolution is initiated in every place independently. And I don't think there's any real evidence for that. In fact, Francis Crick was a believer in something called panspermia, which is this idea that life doesn't initiate everywhere. It initiated maybe even only once, but that it has spread through, and there's all sorts of stuff like looking at scraping off the outside of the space station and coming up with all sorts of um, biological entities that are everywhere. Apparently, it's the idea that yeah, I don't think anyone has managed to initiate life in a laboratory yet.
Well, we maybe not, maybe not. Wilhelm Reich said he did.
I don't believe it,
Well,
actually.
but the thing is, we're all Jim. You're trying
Jim,
to talk, but you're muted. Jim,
you're yelling
you're on
at us.
mute. The thing
You
is, I
could hear
think
me anyway.
I think
Right?
No, we good.
look.
I wanted to say to Linda, not only Reich, but some predecessors
I think we're
discovered
always when
made discoveries of really strikingly similar situations, items.
That's interesting.
I
Thank you
mean,
all.
my
It is.
my leaning, my personal leaning, and this is not a hard belief, but this is what I'm inclined to think. Is that the field is the repository of all information about life and also non-life functioning. And the field can actually shape DNA. That's my prejudice. But I think we're always going to be stuck, in the question, "Mommy, where do babies come from?" You know, I think we may never uh, get to the solution to this mystery of the origin of life. And it could be that there's no origin of life. In other words, that life, that the universe has been eternal and will go on eternally, and life was always part of the scheme. It never had to begin. It had to begin in this lifeless place. It had to get from here to there somehow. Okay, but it may never have had a beginning. There may never have been a lifeless time. We don't know. I think that's part of the great mystery, and it may always be that way. Um,
Yeah, can I jump in here just briefly? Linda, may I address that life topic, origin of life with you briefly? Is if Reich were the only person that I had come across saying what he was saying about the origins of life and so on, and he never claimed he created life. He said it came, as Mike has been referring, it comes out of the field. And that is what the field contains is indeed a complete mystery. However, if he were the only person that I knew of that ever said something like that, that was, let's say, that was not generally picked up by standard science. I would be most inclined to leave it right at the wayside as an interesting curiosity, perhaps. However, there were people that came before him that proposed and found in very limited, well, I say demonstration, um, uh, basically a very similar kind of operation situation, and these are people who were Western scientists or the scientists of their time. They weren't spiritualists from the East. It wasn't it may, however, whatever intuition they brought to the project, there was also what we would call some scientific attention.
If I had any way of understanding how the field was working, I would be less astounded every time that the Wordle angel gave me the solution on the third and sometimes the second guess. So consistently, or I would be less in, I would be more going, yeah, sure, rather than being astounded by the series of synchronicities, impossible circumstances that are bringing about this movie, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so,
Well, I might add one more final thing, is that it appears, although I'm not a scholar of Reich, it appears that he had no knowledge of some of the Europeans' work that preceded him. I mean, the guy that read everything didn't read enough.
yeah, and he apparently didn't read any of the Eastern literature either. Um, But look, refer to impossibilities. I'll throw one in, and I can mention this because my partner screenwriter is not tuned in tonight. Um, so um, um, the most recent bit of good fortune, is that when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, this is not good. Um, he's off the project for 3 or 4 weeks. Oh, that's because he's directing his first feature,
Oh, wow.
which elevates him considerably in the business. Okay, um, which makes the success of the project even more likely. And that came out of left field, as far as I knew. You know, okay. Um, The last, maybe these two little tidbits that I got from articles may stir some more of the same. Um, there was a New York Times book review of a book, forget the author now. It was called The Arrogant Ape. And a lot of this is like, in a sense, nothing all that new, but it's an exploration of the minds of animals of diverse kinds, you know. And of course, we're astounded what the crows can do, and we're astounded by what the octopus can do, and we keep getting astounded, And the bottom line is, um, the human mind is not so exceptional. It really isn't, you know. Um, and uh, and you know, partly, that means that the Anunnaki were advanced over us, only, as I was saying, because of more experience with their own actual evolution, their own uh, adaptation to environment, and also adaptation to a more technological environment than we had. Um, Another piece, there was a Wall Street Journal article um, summarizing the findings of somebody out of Arizona State, um, that the gist of it was that the many variants of Homo sapiens all around the world, and I've lost count, but there are dozens by now, you know, were adaptations to different environments at different times, you know. Um, and so this makes me think, well, we'll never untangle this one because the variations are, some of them are environmental adaptations, and some of them are ongoing trial and error at the genetic level in the lab. And how much of one, how much of the other, and what kind of sequence, I I don't see that there's any point in really trying to obsessively make it all make sense. I don't think it's possible. Um, but of course, some people will make it their life's work and get into ferocious fights about it, you know, and you know, if that's what turns them on, you know, they can go for it. But I don't think we're ever going to sort it out. Um, um, but according to the tablets, you know, Enki did think that their final result was really quite remarkable. Um, uh, and that was seconded by the writers, the poet writers of Genesis. Um, hmm. Well, that's all my unstructured research has come up with these last 2 months. Um, Tomorrow we'll have some fresh tea leaves to read um, all over the country. That's going to be strong hints of how things are going. Um, um, and maybe the next No Kings mass rally will have even more millions. Um, we sure are living in that Chinese curse, aren't we? Yeah.
Would you throw in a few minutes of why you feel optimistic? I'd like to hear it.
Oh, well, this may seem kind of strange, but the stories that came out of the abduction phenomena, the stories told by the abductees who recalled what happened. I don't know how many of you have read the books, but you know they recalled what happened to them in a light trance, light hypnosis, and consistently they were being sampled for tissue, including reproductive tissue. Um, and I don't know how solid this is, but a number of the abductees were certain that some of the people that they were encountering on Earth were actually hybrids, that they had uh, received some genetic material from the visitors. So the visitors have nothing to do with the Anunnaki. They're from way, way beyond our solar system and way, way beyond our technology. Um, um, and the conclusion of one of the researchers, um, David Jacobs, who his day job was history professor at Temple, um, uh, one of his conclusions was that the reason that they over here was in preparation for humanity destroying ourselves, you know, and they were waiting to hybridize the remnants of humanity for a more adaptive, more rational species. And so they're going to write the next chapter of hybridization, you know,
After we destroy ourselves.
after we destroy our civilization, right? And that may, you know, I wouldn't say
And
this.
that's what you find hopeful. Just
Yeah,
checking.
that's
Yeah.
the hopeful part?
Yeah, all right.
Holy cow.
The cows, right?
It's not, it's like, well, it's not the end. It's, it's not the end with us. It was just, we're in preparation for the next chapter. I mean, look, stories keep getting rewritten and rewritten and rewritten, so things biologically get rewritten and rewritten.
That's true.
That's
But
fair.
So that's part.
to say that I'm going to give you my version of hopeful, just because I'd like to, if that's all right. What I'm reading into what's happening now is the whole idea of this particular crisis is to wake people up, and that what this is perhaps a an awakening of consciousness that will change the cycles. And that's my hopefulness, is that I believe, because of my own personal experience with life, it is possible to wake up in such a way that you recognize that you yourself are full of shit. And when you get that, you can really get that, it changes everything. And so that's where I find hope, is that this is really a transformation of consciousness, and we're up to it, I think.
I can go along with that, Linda. It's a
Good.
my sense of it is everybody or almost everybody is going to get what they want, or what they think they want. And then they're going to look, and then if they're still alive, they're going to learn maybe it wasn't such a big deal. Other things are more important.
Yeah, there's something going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
now my ultimate confidence slash hope, is that even if the planet is incinerated, and it really is the end of life, in the third orbit around this particular sun, that the universe is teeming with life, an infinite number of life planets, all energetically, spiritually connected in some way, life goes on, and if this particular experiment in that the universe brought about, the combination of two humanoid species at different levels of evolution, one of them getting jump started, the other getting rejuvenated, to get what they've lost. If that experiment fails, all right, didn't work, but it was worth trying. um, so you know, is that possible only through um, dissociation? I don't know that I can say that's okay with me, you know. Um,
It's
uh,
realistic though.
um, it's okay. Uh, um, and I guess the ultimate source is that um, even though there are bumps and bruises and breaks and burns, that the spirit is essentially beneficent. Um, and yes, there is a dark side, a necessary dark side. Um, why that is, why evil must exist along with good, that's again part of the mystery that will never be solved. Um, It's like there was a great line in a spy movie where I think it's Tom Hanks' character is bringing about the exchange of a captured in America Russian spy, an exchange. They're walking towards the exchange point, and it's very likely that this spy, who lived in America for a long time, is going to get executed when he gets back home. And so the American character says to him, like, because this Russian guy is so calm. He says, "Don't you worry?" And guy shrugs his shoulders, said, "Would it help?" Would it help? I can't do anything about it. Why, why worry? Um, should we say goodnight? All right. Hopefully we'll reconvene in 2 months. At the current rate of discovery, unless, something so hot comes up that we absolutely have to get together to talk about it. Okay.
I wanted to point out that David Jacobs came down to see me from Philadelphia to talk to my congregation. And some things he talked about were really, how should we say, unnerving. Even if I were ahead of the game by knowing what he was going to talk about, it was still mind blowing. I just wanted to add that. And I didn't know he passed away since you said so last time.
It may have, a friend of mine who stayed in touch with Jacobs said that as a result of, what he was discovering and concluding, that he had gotten profoundly depressed.
Oh, how could you not be?
I could avoid it.
So, yeah, it's not so easy to.
Not so easy. In his case, he was actually dealing, with the abductees.
I know. I met one of these abductees, and it's a story unto itself. I should tell it sometime. She did not know she was an abductee, but I described to her before she described it to me. I said, "Can this come into your consciousness? You're in a room, there are people or things around, and within the rest of the room, that you can see fetuses in different kinds of contraptions." And she almost passed out. I described a little bit more what was the usual scene. And she was a Russian Jewish scientist in the NIH. Anyway, different story, I'm sure.
Well,
But, good to hear about, isn't it?
one of the abductees that was in treatment with me, stop me if I told this story ever before. I didn't know about that aspect of his history. I couldn't make sense out of his bodily sensitivity and his tremendous level of anxiety. It just didn't fit with his life story,
Yeah,
with his story of his mother's, like it wasn't a great story, but it should not have produced the severity of symptoms that he was suffering with. And he started to elaborate on more stuff. Anyway, it came clear to me that he was telling an abduction story. Him and his sister, were taken up into a ship, and it explained a whole lot of things, and so I broke the news to him, like, hey, what you're telling me is totally convincing for this scenario, um, and his, because these were shadowy memories that he had, of being taken up in a beam of light and the whole deal, they were in his awareness, but he had never, put them together with that impossibility, So I said, all of these things that they're in your mind, that you can't let go of. They actually happen. And he told me that he really wished that I had come to the conclusion that these were hallucinations and that he was schizophrenic. That would have been a lot easier to take than my telling him that what he was remembering actually happened, and then he disappeared. Never came back. I've been treating him for a few years. It was like he had to withdraw. He had to go. It was such a blow of shame. The shame aspect came so strongly that he had to withdraw. He couldn't avoid and deny it. I was convincing, and it was the truth. So he couldn't unremember it, but he had to withdraw from it.
Yeah, wow. But you headed to something else if you can.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to do.
Um, so that's one of the reasons why, by the way, in writing the story and, with the book, just sticking with, the inhabitants of this solar system, and totally staying away from current, our current visitors,
Yeah.
because, they were probably around back then also to some extent, and that just gets way, the story just sticking with the Anunnaki and Homo erectus, that's complicated enough, to throw in the possibility that there was, some kind of, galactic monitoring going on at the same time. That's that, it's just too much. Um, um,
Well, it's too much for tonight, that's for sure.
Well, and Mike, could I just throw in? I just read this article this morning, and I don't know if it's been through peer review yet. And this may be something you and I may have the same similar feeds. But this article about somebody who's looking at the genetics of abductees and finding large chunks of their genome that are not in their parents. Have you come across that?
in other words, they were altered,
Well,
in,
I
yeah,
I think probably the alteration was happened at the level of the parents. I don't see how you can change every cell's DNA. I mean, maybe you can, but yeah, I'm not going to bet on that. But you can certainly change the genome at the level of germ cells. And
yes,
so that, but to say, and large chunks of DNA, genetic modification, the way we do it, and probably the way the Anunnaki did it as well, all involve viruses, and those are big. And so, I mean, I'm watching this thing, and I'm going, yeah, this all fits together. With there's a what a Lego set for genetics, and they're universal or something on that order. Yeah, it's
I
interesting.
didn't, that may be in my inbox, that I haven't read that
Maybe it
article
may
yet.
be. This is from Medium. I find the most interesting things to read on Medium still.
No, send that to me, I'm not getting Medium these days.
If
I
I can
just,
find it, I will send it to you.
okay, um, there was just too much crazy stuff that was coming through that
It's funny. I haven't gotten much politics coming through on Medium. I get a lot on 3i Atlas, which I can't stop reading about. And the people that I think 3i Atlas is something we've never seen before. I think it's very cool.
maybe so, maybe so.
Maybe we'll know. I mean, I don't. I'm wondering what qualifies as life, and I think that's one of the things we're going to have to start asking.
Well, yes, there's, and certainly Wilhelm Reich was into this. There's kind of a ladder. Okay. So, you know, there's some stirrings down at the very bottom. There's some entities that are halfway up, and then there was full-fledged life, viruses around here somewhere,
Mhm.
okay. Um,
If there are only really two possibilities, right? Either matter started first or consciousness started first. And we all make the assumption that it was matter, and the Big Bang, but if you go back and say, nah, maybe it was consciousness that got
Well,
us.
I don't think the Big Bang was real. The Big Bang is an artifact.
The Big
It's
Bang is something that makes somebody feel good. I don't know, but I don't think it makes any sense.
well,
But
it
if
makes it makes sense only if you. It's actually an inevitable conclusion if you posit that the field, that the ether does not exist, doesn't exist and doesn't move. Once you make that assumption, then you have to say that the redshift is a uh, what's the something effect of
Doppler.
that was a Doppler effect. Yeah, thank you. You have to say that the redshift is a Doppler effect, and then you got to take it back to a Big Bang. Okay. But if you accept the existence of the immaterial fluid field, then you don't need that at all.
right, and if immaterial fluid field involves consciousness somehow,
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
then
Right.
you say, when the ancients said the gods withdrew and became stars, maybe they really did. And maybe stars are really conscious. And maybe they do represent, or, stars and planets, maybe they do represent primal energies.
That's a
There's,
cool thought.
there's a
Maybe,
lot of
maybe
stuff to
I,
think about.
is this, I think this, I don't know if this is the book of John, but maybe it's a bit of a mistranslation. And it wasn't that in the beginning was the word, maybe it was in the beginning was the idea, or maybe in the beginning was the consciousness, not word, the word is just is playing it down.
But what if all our models are wrong? What if all the stories we've been telling ourselves,
We'll go
all
back
of
to
the
what
There you go.
that
there,
starts revealing itself?
there
That's
is.
what gives me hope.
Look, I think we're always going to be fixated with the idea of a beginning, and maybe there never was a beginning, but we are fixated on the question of the beginning because we were not allowed into mommy and daddy's bedroom. So the beginning is a great mystery that we're trying to solve.
That might be a little esoteric.
Huh? But we do seem to be obsessed with a beginning. And like, well, wait a minute. Why?
We're obsessed with something definite. We
Yeah.
want answers.
Exactly right. We
Yeah.
want certainty.
Which there isn't. And so that's what gets us in a lot of trouble.
And if you can authoritatively present a beginning and it's publicly accepted, you've just become a grand authority.
Hmm?
I mean, for some people, that's their life goal.
Yeah.
Well, for more than a few people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, we seek certitude.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Mike could say it much better than I can, but we can find some degree of certitude in trusting our own feelings.
I wouldn't call it certitude, but I'd call it acceptable inner guidance. And I'm willing to take the consequences of whatever comes of that before, yeah. I mean, I think what's her name? I saw recently talking about us needing a different operating system. And that's exactly the language that I would use. As beings, we need to find a different way to find our primary motivation. And the idea that it's a different operating system, I think, is a good model, a good a way to language it.
Mm. Something like that. It's a little dry for me,
Okay.
personally.
Well, if you talk about love and fear as operating systems. Ways of interpreting reality. Input, ways of interacting with input. Anyway. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you all,
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mike.
Buddy, for the conversation.
and I'll be in touch about another gathering.